Conversations for Peace. This is episode 2. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Jule. I pastor Hillwood Presbyterian Church, USA, that gathers on the west side of Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm so excited today to welcome to Conversations for Peace, Sarah Champion, who is our newest community partner. She is Forest Walk With Me. And I want to introduce Sarah a little bit, and then she's going to tell more about herself. Do you want to at least say hello to our listeners?
Hello.
So glad she's here. I first began communicating with Sarah probably as early as the summer. And Sarah and another forest therapy, certified forest therapist, were to be here at an event, and COVID struck in September, and that didn't happen. But we have continued to communicate, and somewhere at the start of 2024, we actually met in person and started talking about and dreaming about what might be done to use this 9 acres that is the land that's been entrusted to Hillwood Presbyterian Church for the good of others. So we're so glad you're guiding us in that process and using your gifts to do that. And just a word to introduce Sarah. From my perspective, when I first met Sarah in person, I was struck by how calm she is and how entirely grounded you are, Sarah. It's evident that you are, and I know you spend time outside, which always helps, getting our feet in the grass, definitely. Sarah is a creative. She has a creative streak as well, and she plays the flute.
I do.
She's worked around the music business a little bit. She's a barista as well, which we're excited about because ultimately we would love to have a barista here and be able to serve the community with coffee and the ways that people can come together in coffee. So here we are, Conversations for Peace, and tell us more about you, Sarah. How do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners? Let's start there.
Yeah. As you heard, I wear a lot of hats. I worked in the music industry for a good while. That's what I went to college for, and I came to Nashville for college. I was doing that for like 8 years, and I was fairly successful, but not feeling fulfilled, I think. And I was struggling with some mental health issues. I think it's funny that you say I'm calm because I struggle with anxiety.
You seem very calm.
Yeah, I think I'm good at keeping it inside, but anxiety is my kind of kryptonite. And so I was looking for ways to heal that in myself, and I stumbled upon forest therapy with Georgia of Forest Therapy Nashville, who's the other guide you mentioned. And I went on a walk with her at Cheekwood, and I was just, my mind was blown. I was like, not only is this like the practice for me, but it's also something I feel like I need to share with others, something that like spoke really deeply in my soul. So I began the training, and it led to me leaving my career.
Whoa.
And and making that leap and kind of jumping into this position where I wear these many hats, like barista. I still do freelance music business work.
Cool.
But I'm focusing on forest therapy and trying to make that kind of my main career.
The main gift you give. And what I have discovered along the way, because I actually grew up in the forest on Lake Michigan in Wisconsin, what I've discovered, I don't even know how I learned about forest therapy, but it's a certified process and a certification process. Until you came along, there was one in Nashville, Georgia. And so it was wonderful to hear that, like, she's another colleague in town now. There's not enough green space around us, right? And so what I really became aware of during COVID, it's like everybody took to the outdoors, it seemed like. And was that about the time when you were like learning about forest therapy? And
yeah, it was a little bit into COVID. I just stumbled upon a walk, and then it kind of just kickstarted something in me where I was like, okay, this feels so right that I'm just gonna sign up. I'm just gonna do it. And then it just kind of went boom, boom, boom. Here I am, a certified guide and I'm doing the thing.
That's awesome.
Which is really exciting.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
do you want to tell us, I'd love to hear a little bit more about like forest therapy in, particular, but also the training. So whichever you want to talk about, because it might be like, what? So I need somebody to like guide me to go take a walk in the woods,
Right.
whatever. Like I actually have had people say that to me, and I've been on a walk with Georgia as well, and we soon will walk together in a couple weeks, but it's not just a walk in the woods.
Right.
So tell us more.
It's a very valid question too, because there are so many different ways to be out in nature. There's like hiking and trail running, and so everything has its own kind of purpose, or it feeds your mind and soul in a different way. So I guess I'll explain kind of how a forest therapy walk goes, and then I'll talk about like how we were trained in each way of doing it.
Yeah.
So I give a traditional introduction that gives the history of forest therapy, which is that in the it's been, people have been in nature since the beginning of time.
Right.
So there's that. But in the mid-1980s in Japan, the economy was shifting from a rural agricultural based to being more urban, office based, and they were noticing a lot of physical and mental health problems increasing in their citizens. And so they put a lot of funding behind science to figure out how to help people. And one of the things that came out of that was this idea that because humans evolved in the forest as a species, it is really beneficial to us, body and mind, to return to the forest and spend time in there. And so there are some tangible health benefits that they've recorded, in addition to all of the like anecdotal knowledge that we all know, because we all have experienced that.
Yeah, you just feel good when you're out in nature.
Yeah, exactly. So they developed this practice of just being out in nature. So it's called Shinrin-yoku in Japan, which literally means to bathe in the atmosphere of the forest.
Oh, wow.
Which is why we call it forest bathing sometimes.
Right.
But forest bathing and forest therapy are pretty interchangeable.
They're the same, but the listener doesn't think they have to go into the woods and take off all their clothes.
Yes.
I get asked that all the
I've
time.
been asked that too.
The last couple of years I've been talking about forest bathing, and so I appreciate forest therapy.
Forest
it's a little
therapy.
clearer for people.
Or nature therapy, because you don't have to be in a forest. You can be in a beach. You can be in a parking lot with a tree. It's very open. So that practice was developed in Japan. They've really made it part of their culture to the point where medical professionals will actually prescribe forest therapy to patients, which is super cool. And they have places you can go, and they're for forest bathing. So the program I'm trained in, the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, kind of took those ideas and brought them to the rest of the world in a way that is, I guess, more open to other cultures who don't have it as ingrained in their society. So it's a series of invitations, and they're very open. It's very trauma informed. So as long as you don't run off or hurt anybody, you can do kind of whatever you want. So maybe I'll say, like, go explore all the colors in the field, or go notice what's in motion, or follow some scents.
Oh, wow.
Or go introduce yourself to a tree.
Yeah.
And then I'll give you a prescribed amount of time for that, but you don't have to worry about it. I'll keep track of that and just call you back. And then we talk about what we're noticing.
Yeah. Cool.
And that's really cool, because people really, it can be anything from I'm noticing that leaf right there to I'm noticing the death and rebirth cycle of life, and it reminds me of this thing in my life that I'm dealing with. So people, it really is meeting you wherever you need to be in that moment. So then we do that for anywhere from an hour to 3 hours.
Wow. 3 hours, That would really kind of get you out of that office and get you back into your body and connected.
I really like
all things.
The longer ones, because you go into this thing that we call liminality, which is like where you're not keeping track of time. You're not really worried about what you have to do the next day. You might even forget that you're human. And that's kind of my role as the guide, is to keep you safe, but keep that space open. So like you don't have to worry about anything except maybe poison ivy.
Yeah.
Just don't touch it. But
So you're on the hunt for poison ivy.
I am on the hunt,
here
and I
in
do
advance,
show people what it looks like, and I have the wash. So even if you touch it, we've got it covered. You really can't get too wrong.
Right.
But other than that, just go explore. I'll let you know when we're done.
Mm-hmm.
See what happens.
See what you notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the training is to kind of get yourself into the mind of being a guide, to familiarize yourself with local plant life, any hazards or awarenesses, to really learn about the land that you're on, and learn about acknowledging the long history of each piece of land that you experience.
Yes.
That was a big part for me. I really enjoyed learning about the land acknowledgements and the watersheds, and just how the land has been shaped over thousands and hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
And yeah, you do the training with a bunch of other guides, and everybody, it's really amazing because everybody has their own, piece that they bring to it, but you're all like-minded, and that you're all like, we love being outside, and we love wanting to share that with other people. So that was really lovely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I want to ask you about, just tell me more about introducing yourself to a tree. That might sound really weird to people out there, but doesn't sound weird to me, but introducing yourself to a tree. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people do it all number of ways. I like to get in really close and get a microscopic view. So I like to just look at everything and see all the little beings that live on the tree. And for me, trees kind of are like apartment buildings. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So when I introduce myself to a tree, to me it feels like a community, but also an ancient being at the same time. But some people will go and literally speak to the tree and ask it a question and see what's reflected back in them. Some people just spend silent time with the tree. Some people hug the tree.
Yes.
So really it's however you feel like you would want to introduce yourself to that tree or spend time with the tree.
And you had said earlier, acknowledging a tree is a being.
Yes.
It's all things are living, right? Yes. And so a tree is a being. It has a history. It has a purpose. In the reading I've done in forest therapy, and it even talks about the way the trees communicate with one another and protect each other, and how vital they are. Yeah. And when we do yoga here, which is how we actually first heard about forest therapy, one of our yoga instructors through Small World Yoga is involved teaching yoga at Cheekwood, and then heard about the forest therapy being offered there and told us about it because she loves to have us look at a tree. Often we're doing yoga outside. Yeah. We have a very lovely little spot from 3, I think they're oaks out there. Yeah, big ones out there. And so we love to do our yoga under there, especially when we do tree pose. She'll always have us look at the tree. So to remember that a tree is a being, and it's been so, how old do trees normally get? Do you know?
Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years is kind of a young tree, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we have too much old growth in this area. But yeah, I mean, multiple generations.
Right, right. And I love the stories about how the tree mamas, they ensure, there's such a wisdom in a way that they talk to the seedlings and how they really don't allow the seedlings to kind of take over generationally until there truly is space for the seedlings and the nutrients in the environment. It's just fascinating.
And once you look at the forest in that way, you see that tree is supporting that tree physically, that tree has made room for that tree to have some sun, that tree is decomposing, which is providing good soil for these other trees. And that was kind of a big eye-opening moment for me, was going out there. As somebody that has anxiety, I like to be in control, and I worry a lot about what's going on around me and are other people okay. But going out into nature and just being it's got itself covered.
Right.
It has things handled. I don't have to worry about making this tree grow. Right. Because it's doing its thing.
Right.
And that's wonderful.
Right.
And I can just be.
Yeah, we can just be. And I know, like, in the way that we live in an urban environment, right?
Mhm.
The trees have been planted in a way, they've been planted by human beings in a way that is not necessarily all that beneficial. Of course, it's a way to get nature to us,
Yes.
right? But it's not all that beneficial to the forest and the ecosystem. So, like, I have seen when I moved into my home, the most recent home I'm living in, that like a tree died because it was so clear it wasn't supposed to have, it was built near a little forest on my lawn, right? And so it didn't last.
Right.
And it was so clear, like it's just not a natural way for that tree to even be. And so to just have that appreciation for like, I love how you talked about getting in touch with the land and just how hundreds of thousands of years old the land is.
Yeah.
And to just think right now, the land under our feet is ancient and has its own story.
Yeah.
And so kind of helping us like come back to the land, especially like I said earlier, like so many people started doing that during COVID, right? Like going outside. There was one place we could be, right? And stay, like, had a sense that we would be safe still.
Yeah.
So have you noticed, I know you've done a little bit of walking here around this land. What have you noticed so far here?
Well, the very first time I was walking, there was a whole herd of deer in the woods, and I startled them because I was not expecting them to be on this land because it doesn't seem vast. You know, and so I was like, oh, I'm misjudging how much is here already. So that was a kind of, I like check myself. But I did walk through the woods, and there's a lot of, there's like a little creek, there's grass, there's flowers, the trees on the lawn are beautiful. So there is kind of this holistic element of, there's the garden that you guys have, so there's the crafted nature where humans and the more than natural world have worked together. There's the fields, there's the forest, and then there's the lawn with the trees. So you've kind of got this well-rounded playground to explore and lots that you can see.
Yeah.
And it feels very safe.
Yes.
Too.
I think so too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have said, because, you know, we're having a walk, you're going to lead a walk here in a couple of weeks, and people have said, like, forest there beyond, you know, all we got is grass, but no, like, we really do have a lot more here, and so that slowing down, and I know in myself, it was during COVID when we started to do worship outside, and, you know, finally it was like, whoa, it felt like a shift from moving, I don't know, it was almost like having an understanding of living on the land to like being in the land or being a part of the earth more. So how have you noticed that? Have you noticed anything like that in your, I mean, you haven't just started doing this a few years ago. You've been out in the wild for a long time, right?
I have. I like grew up in Texas in the pine forest that they have there. So I was just always out. I was a bug girl, so I was always lifting up rocks, finding bugs, collecting them. And then I did lose that because, you know, in middle school, it's not cool if you're the girl that likes bugs. Like, that's
the
weird.
bug girl.
Yeah. So I just like lost that. I was like, I want to be cool. Did life, and then I kind of came back to it. Because I'd always been going outside, but it's this element of like really just being and losing yourself and just watching the ants walk across the ground. That I had kind of lost and refound. Yeah.
So it sounds like forest therapy or just being forest bathing is just one of the biggest ways you pause for peace.
Definitely.
Yeah. Are there any other ways you do?
Well, it's related. But I guess one thing I've learned in this is that I was trying to do all of these ways to pause for peace and fit myself into them. So I tried meditation for a while, you know, I did all of the things, and I just was like trying to do this. And when I found forest therapy, it was like, oh no, this fits me. I don't need to fit into this. And so through that, I kind of found that if I'm in the middle of having like a panic attack or an anxiety attack, all I have to do is find a tree out a window or just see it and be like, look, that tree is here. It has all these people doing all this nonsense around it, and it doesn't care. It's fine. It's still growing. And I can do that right now.
Yeah.
And that has been huge in that, like, it stops my panic attacks.
Cool. Wow.
So that's been really big, but I do think everybody just needs to find the thing that fits them.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so beautiful that there are all of these different modalities seemingly growing, at least here in an urban area, growing in familiarity and access. People can find almost any healing
Very cool.
therapy, either in person or online, if not, right? So that's awesome. It almost sounds a little bit like, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting into your story, but as a child, maybe you were a little more connected, and then did you experience anxiety kind of growing and panic attacks growing as you were almost like split from the land?
I've always had anxiety. I have like some phobia, obsessive compulsive anxiety.
Not of bugs, but
not of bugs. No, I love bugs. Like phobias related to like sickness that I was dealing with as a young child and couldn't verbalize to get help. So nobody knew how to help me because I didn't know what my problems were.
Right.
So I had kind of like, not like a tormented childhood, but like there was a lot of anxiety in me from a young age, and I've always carried that. And I've just always been going. I'm like a perfectionist. You know, I was like a good student, good kid, one of those that like went right into college, went right into a career. And so I did never stop and say like, is this what I want? Or is this what other people want for me? And I just want to please them, and that's what I'm doing. And when I stopped, I realized that's what I had been doing.
Right.
And it's hard to see when you are doing something that you don't hate.
Right.
And
love it.
Yeah. And I found people I really, like coworkers I really liked. I was successful, but I was just like, this is not the thing for me. And now that I've found the thing for me, I need to do that.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So, have you ever noticed if a tree shows signs of anxiety?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, obviously
I'm an energy healer. Go wherever you need to.
Obviously, I don't claim to know how trees think or are.
Yes.
But in my mind, they see us as like on fast forward. Their time is slower.
Yes.
And I really am drawn to trees that have just kind of grown around things like barbed wire fences or like farm equipment, where they're just kind of like, okay, this whole piece of barbed wire is in me, but I just have to keep growing around it.
Yeah. Wow.
And so it's like this trauma, but it's like, well, there's still the bark, it's still growing. There might be a little indentation where the piece of wire is, but the tree says like, I gotta keep going.
Right.
I gotta move on. This is still here. And especially around Nashville, because there's so much farmland. Once you start looking, you see that there are a lot of trees that have just grown around things that humans have put there. That and people carving their initials into trees is something we should not do.
It's not helpful, is
No,
it?
no, it's not good. And that always makes me sad, because that's just like, just like little cuts away at the bark, which is so important to the tree, and protecting it.
Yeah, the bark, tell us more about the function of the bark. Like, so I write my initials in, then what?
Well, then it's kind of like a skin. I'm not an expert, but it's kind of like a skin. So then if fungi and other invaders can come in and hurt the tree, and then the tree has to kind of heal itself. So I think in my mind it feels like if you were to like slice open your skin, have a cut.
Right.
You'd have to put a Band-Aid over it. It would heal. You would want to have something like antiseptic.
Yes.
Which trees are amazing because they have like the sap and things that are that for them.
Oh wow, cool. Yeah.
So they will heal themselves, but
yeah,
you still shouldn't cut into them.
Yeah. I was reading in forest therapy stuff, and it's been a while, but it was something like how many years it takes for like just a cut of a tree, how many years it takes for the bark to like
Yeah.
kind of, and the tree to kind of heal itself. It's years.
Yeah. Right.
Like for like one little snip
Yeah.
of a tree could
I mean,
take
their
like,
timelines are so much longer.
Yeah.
So yeah.
yeah. So definitely a different, like, yes, approaching them as living beings. And I know some of us can get very frustrated at the nature that's around us in the lawn, whatever we worry about, is a tree going to fall in our home,
Yeah.
right? That kind of begs that question once again of building in a way, right? Providing housing for people in a way that is respectful of all
Yeah.
the beings. I live down a road where it's like, it's gonna sound so weird, I know, but there's like major clearing going on right now to expand a road in an area. And then just today I drove another way to get to work, and I'm like, what in the world? They're putting in a school, and so it's like a massive amount of trees and the underbrush, everything is just being cleared out.
Yeah.
And like, yes, I get it. We need space,
Yeah.
right? I get it. But at the same time, it's like I still have that scent I can get every time I drive by these areas.
Yeah.
It's almost like this is weird, but I'm like, okay, I'm smelling their blood, right? The
Yeah.
blood of the tree that has been,
Yeah.
like, because they've just been cut, clear
Right.
cut.
Yeah. I
All
guess.
right, nature therapists. How do you there's a lot of
I guess
ethics and
one
everything behind all that.
interesting thing about that is one of the studies, and one of the like coolest facts about forest therapy is that trees, especially the pine trees, coniferous trees, release these things called phytoncides, which are kind of like essential oils that get into the air and help the trees, defend themselves from fungi and other invaders, much like the bark does. But when we inhale those, they help us fight off invaders as well, including potentially cancerous cells.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah.
it's a pretty powerful thing to just be out in nature in a like scientifically proven way. So probably what you're smelling is all of those oils being released into the air. So in a way that's kind of beautiful, but it also, the clear cutting like that does hurt my heart, because I don't think you need to cut down every single tree.
Right.
And sure, you can plant new trees, but you just have to consider how long it takes for a tree to grow, and seeds, they pick specific spots, like that oak tree might be there because 100 years ago, the seed on that spot felt like that was the best soil and light and everything mixture to support a tree. So maybe you're going to get rid of that one and plant one over here, and it won't survive because on its own it would have been.
Right, it would have been okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I like in forest therapy, we kind of see people developing this more reciprocal view of nature and our relationship with it, in that like nature's not, like trees are not a resource. Sure, we can use them as a resource, but they are also beings. They've been here longer than most of us, and they are companions in a way. So we should treat them as such.
Yeah. They just move a little slower than my dog does.
Right. And that doesn't mean you can't cut one down if it's threatening your house.
Right.
But maybe you can cut just a limb. Or maybe you cut it down, but you do plant a tree. And in some cases, that is the best solution,
Yeah.
But it's all about just thinking through, how am I interacting with nature and the planet that is, sustaining our life.
Right. Yeah, and so as a certified Healing Touch practitioner, I interact with the Healing Touch community in Nashville, and there was a beautiful healer in Nashville. She passed a few years ago, Vicki Slater. Several people took classes with her, and I've heard her speak about, because she was an energy healer and just like very aware of her energy, just had these amazing gifts, sort of clairsentient, like she could just feel energy.
Yeah.
And she could feel the energy of trees. She had this really interesting gift around that.
Yeah.
And she had spoken about at the Healing Beyond Borders conference one year how she had felt called to heal the trees and to heal where trees were being removed in her neighbor's yard,
Yeah.
actually, because she could sense energetically
Yeah.
there was still disruption there. There was the tree's energy was still there, even though, and she spoke, this sounds very out there, I know, but she spoke about this ritual she would do. She would ask people if they were going to be cutting a tree or cutting a part of a tree, if they would let her know, and she would come and she would commune with the tree and make the tree aware. I know this sounds very out there, but
I have done a similar thing. We had a hackberry, which is a very common tree in Nashville. I think they're really sweet. And we had one in the backyard, and it has a few limbs that are like over the house. And when we were having those rougher storms earlier this year, I went out and I was like, look, tree, I don't want to cut you down because it shades the whole yard. It's beautiful. You can just lay in the yard and look up and see all of the like squirrels and birds, butterflies. So I was like, I don't want to cut you down. We may have to cut off some limbs, but like I need you to not fall on the house.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if that's going to work, but it
hasn't yet.
It made me feel better, and it hasn't fallen yet.
That's great. Vicki talked about she would actually let the tree know in advance it was going to be cut, and she would invite it to to heal its own energy. She would help support that.
Wow.
But she would actually invite it to like almost like remove that energy.
Yeah.
Especially if the tree was being cut entirely.
Right.
Because having those amazing energetic gifts, what she was seeing is the energy of the tree was still there. It was disturbed. It was like bloody energy or whatever. And then it was impacting the humans and the whole rest of the little creatures living there. And so she didn't want her neighbors like getting sick because they mindlessly cut trees down, not knowing like, okay, now you have a whole yard of energy disturbance, which is going to physically impact them, right? So it was so amazing. She was able to invite the trees to do that, and what she was then able to see is the tree's energy then was gone. It was like it dissipated, and it was like clear.
Yeah, and I mean, I could see how, the trees could like be like, okay, I'm leaving, so let's get my energy out these roots to the other trees. Like, that makes sense to me.
They're so interconnected. I think they have so much to teach us.
They do.
About how to be human beings.
Yes,
be
very
creatures
much.
In this world. So
yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about a quote that we want to ask our guests about, and I'm going to just read you the quote. It's from a Zen priest who's the founder of the School of Broken Hearts in Seoul, Korea. And in his book, The Things You Can Only See When You Slow Down, which
Very apt, yes.
He writes, Hemin Sanum writes, the air I inhale enters my body and becomes a part of me. The air that I exhale moves into someone else and becomes a part of her. Just by looking at how the air moves, we realize how we all are connected to one another, not just figuratively, but also literally. And what do those words mean to you, especially as this forest therapist? What do those words mean to you?
It immediately triggers a forest therapy, like, little, I think, like bit that we say, which is, or an invitation, I guess, which is to move through the forest and imagine that as you breathe out, the trees and plants and animals around you breathe in, and as you breathe in, they breathe out, because they're taking in the carbon dioxide and all of that.
The oxygen, carbon dioxide.
So just thinking about like, what does it feel like to breathe in time or in community with this specific space you're in. And then in that way you realize that like you're all breathing the same air, you're all connected. And that's really what I've learned pretty quickly over these last few years is like, once you accept that we're all connected and you look at everybody in that way, things really open up for you and people see that you see them. And I don't know, I feel like I'm moving through the world with more truth in myself since I've been looking at things that way.
It's almost like you become safe for other human beings and other creatures, right? It's like, oh, she's one of us, right?
Yeah.
She
I'm a
gets
safe
it.
person.
She sees.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Beautiful. All right. Do you have any examples from being in the forest when you've seen that specific or seen others have that? It's like that reciprocal relationship finally comes alive.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, every time.
Every time.
Yeah. I've been doing it 2 years, and it still blows my mind. We'll meet for our first share, and people are just like making these connections and saying things that I've never thought of, I've never heard from other people. Just like the most insightful, deep, astounding things come out of the mouths of people, and I think they don't even realize that that was in them.
Yeah.
And then other people are triggered by that to think of something in their own lives, and it just becomes this like, you kind of become a community for a second. And it's a wonderful thing, and I've had multiple groups that have taken photos after only being together for an hour and a half, because you realize that it's a safe space to share almost anything.
To just be you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And explore together. Aw.
Yeah.
I can't wait for our walks here. Yay.
Yeah.
So, is there a place or a setting that you feel most peaceful? Like, you can't just say forest, because I know.
That was my answer is
Because
yes.
there's so many
Yeah.
that you've probably been in. Or like, is there anywhere in this world that you're like, this is where I just feel like most connected and most peaceful?
I mean, where I grew up,
Okay.
which is southeast Texas, just north of Houston, which is a kind of a weird environment for people who've never been in Texas, because
Okay.
it's a pine forest plus kind of a swamp. So you've got the like palmettos really close to the ground. You've got like a little bit of like, if you've been in New Orleans, it's kind of like that weather where it's like really humid.
Yeah.
And I just feel comfortable in the humidity among the palm trees with the bird sound, because I grew up in the forest, and that was like my safe space where I could explore.
Right.
And so whenever I'm back there, I'm just like, oh, I see my roots in that place.
Yeah.
Another place is my grandfather has a farm in southern Indiana, and that's
Oh,
another
cool.
place where I go there and I'm just like, I feel rooted here. And that one is particularly special because there's multiple generations that have been on the same land, and I can really think like, in this land acknowledgement, I'm including my own blood relatives, and in a way that is very cool.
I know,
Yeah.
My parents both passed in the last couple of years, within 6 months of each other, and my sisters and I all grew up in this home that's was my parents' home. It's now our home, and although I still live in Nashville, but it's home, and that house was kind of gifted to my dad from his grandfather, who I knew growing up, and our grandparents, his parents, and his grandpa and grandma all grew up there. And for us, living along the shores of Lake Michigan, we were out as well. I love the rocks a little bit more than
very cool.
than I love the bugs, and the sand. But we were really, I don't know how, we were taught like that there were native people that lived here before. And so one of the coolest things we could do would be find any kind of imprints or any kind of, we look for little arrowheads, along the shore, and just to realize I've learned a little bit more about the history there. The indigenous people there were smart enough to like migrate, in my opinion, smart enough to migrate to the south during winter, of course, and then they would come back. And but those Hollanders, when they landed, they were like, no, we got to stay here in this hardy, cold, weather. So, to think about like who you might also know, not only from your own line, but others that might have been in these pine forests in Texas, or have you discovered any of that? Or
I mean, I've studied a lot about the land here. Not a lot. I have a lot more studying to do. Let's say that. But I've started
into that.
And there are a lot of like Mississippian era, which is like where we have the tribes that still exist today. So like the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Shawnee. Before that, those people, there were big settlements on this land. They had big mounds, big sacred spaces. one of my favorite green spaces, this is a good tie-in, is Old Stone Fort,
Okay.
which is not actually an old stone fort. It is raised mounds around a central field that was used in like ceremonial times.
Oh, wow.
And so you can go and walk through this kind of entryway where they've built the land up around, and it's just very, you can feel the presence of those people, and you can walk into the middle of the space where they had the ceremonies and see, it's kind of like their banquet hall,
right,
in a way.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And just learning about how they lived and how advanced they really were, and all of the things that they were able to do. And here, we just have mounds everywhere. Like,
yep.
Once you start looking for them, you're like, oh, there's one in this corner, there's one in this guy's farmland.
Yeah.
There's evidence everywhere. I also love to go fossil hunting.
Yes.
So, and you just go into any creek, and there's fossils everywhere.
Cool. We'll see what we find down there in that ravine, right?
For sure. Yeah.
We've been told that this church building was actually built on the spring, which I don't know why you would have built a building on a spring other than
silly.
This was the property.
Right.
A little bit of the history too, which we want to sort of dig more into. We're starting to learn that, the Bellmead plantation, it was a plantation at one point in time, and it was a lot of the property all around here, including, it's very possible that this church property had been a part of the fields of the plantation. Wow. It was a huge plantation, horse farm, and can learn all about it at the Bellmead historical site, is what they call it now. But to think, I love to have that image of whatever happened here on this land, like we're working to reclaim it for good and for healing for all people. And so we really, I think, try pretty hard to have an inclusive mindset and welcome all here, knowing the challenges we still face as a society.
And that's something we include in the land acknowledgement, is thinking about all of the past and current tenders of this land, including those that were forced to tend the land, and just taking a moment to acknowledge all of the care that they had for this space, and all that they experienced on this land that we're on.
Right. And how the land can be so healing for us, but how our prayers and intentions might also need to be part of like healing that violence that took place in fields where people
especially
were enslaved.
In this area, because it's so much of it was that land, and so we need to acknowledge that happened.
And the Trail of Tears kind of going right through here. So like as soon as we kind of dive into the forest, right, now we find ourselves like, oh wow, like all of these societal struggles that we have and are going through, and like trying to understand the history and how it's impacting the way life is today, but how we also can then begin to acknowledge and heal and have that sense of reverence. And the trees can get us there, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They've witnessed it all, so they are there to share with us all the history of what they've seen.
Yeah. And to have that sense of surviving all of that too, right? And like thriving.
Right.
So, wow, cool. All right. So I just wanted to say, like, is there anything else that we haven't talked about today that you want to make sure we cover? About you, about what you do to create and cultivate peace, about forest therapy, any of it?
I mean, I think everything can be distilled down into like just seeing things and trying to just see them as they are and not judge them. And I think when you approach with that compassion, everything else kind of falls into place. And I think this is just one of the many ways that you can empty your brain so that you have that capacity.
Kind of approach with beginner's mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, it's going to be a struggle as for me as the spring comes. I had several different species of snakes arriving in my front yard last year, which I still struggle with snakes. I'll just admit. And part of it is because I grew up in a place where all we had was grass snakes. Our great-grandfather, he taught us how to pick them up and, how to like make sure they were not on the road. And so, they wouldn't get squished. But what else might you discover when you go into the forest, right?
Yeah.
There's very colorful snakes.
Very colorful snakes, a couple poisonous ones. I think your best bet if you're forest bathing with me is just like don't bother the snake.
Stay away from it.
Because in the moment, we don't know exactly what kind of snake it is. I can tell you. But like just leave the snake alone. Watch it. It'll be fine. I really like a challenge. So I like when somebody comes to a walk that has some kind of nature fear. Because part of my job is to have a solution.
Right.
So like if you touch poison ivy, we'll wash your hands with the poison ivy wash. Done deal. If you get bit by a snake, I'm wilderness first aid trained. We'll know what to do. You'll be okay. But also you're probably not going to get bit by a snake.
Right. It's probably highly unlikely.
It's probably highly unlikely. And everywhere we're going to be in Nashville is close enough that we can, we'll get you out in an ambulance. But again, you're probably not going to need an ambulance.
Right.
So just let me show you that it's all okay. And that maybe you've been told not to touch anything because you don't know what it is, don't smell it, don't taste it. But you can. And that's the space that I want to create for people.
Yeah, because forest therapy we haven't hardly even talked about this yet, but it really does encourage all the senses, right?
Yes.
So tasting. What do you want us to taste something in nature? What?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Of course it is, because you love the bugs.
Yeah.
You love crawling around.
I've eaten some bugs before.
What's the weirdest thing you've seen or heard anybody say that they have tasted on a forest walk with you?
Oh, I love that you can lick a rock and tell what kind it is. I can't tell, but
oh, wow.
Geologists can lick a rock to tell what kind it is.
Wow.
I feel like a rock is usually safe to lick.
Yeah, okay, it's safe to lick rocks.
Once you start looking at all of the ground cover we have here, so much of it is edible.
Oh.
So once you start learning things, you're like, I can eat this, I can eat this. You can just have a little snack.
Yeah.
And one thing that we do on the longer walks is, if possible, we forage something from the land and make a tea with it to close out.
Oh, cool.
So in that way, I'm you can taste what I've picked out and prepared for you. I also really love just smelling, it's called duff. It's like the leaf layer that goes right above the dirt.
Oh.
So you just take the dry layer off and then smell just all of the decomposing things in the dirt, and it's just the most alive smell.
It's very rich.
Yes.
Yeah, very rich.
Yeah, and I just think it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people to do that, or just I don't know, just how many layers of scent can you notice? That's a good one to get people really, especially in the spring when there's the honeysuckle and jasmine blooming, and you can really smell different layers of things. You can even bring some air into your mouth and taste it on your tongue. Maybe you can turn your head one way and see how the air tastes over here versus over here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really getting into all of it and
But
as a Christian preacher, I think about just that, looking at what's underneath. It just reminds the cycle of, we claim is that the cycle of life, death, life again, right? And so it's shown to us in nature all the time, right? It's this is a universal truth in a lot of ways, that everything dies. We all live again in a different way. We might lose our egos in the process, which is not a bad thing. But it's all
the energy
just recycled.
All recycled. Yeah. And I think almost every walk I've been on, somebody says that within the first hour. In a big way, and then connects it back to their lives, and it just makes me feel good that this is a space for that, and that we've been able to do that. But I also feel good if somebody says that they like the way the leaves look. That is an equally amazing answer.
Yeah.
Or no answer at all.
Right.
It really is whatever you need it to be. It's not what I'm expecting you to do.
Right. Oh, I wanted to ask you, what have you seen as a biggest block for people in getting into the experience of forest therapy?
think just getting them out there, because it sounds weird.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that you can say like, oh, it's like biking. And everybody knows that. Like, you have to have a little bit of an explanation, and you're like, it's this thing where you go out and I give you prompts, and you can do them, but you cannot do them. And we're just hanging out, you're playing, but like, you could cry.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like whatever you need, but outside. But I think once people get out there and they do it, they're like, oh, I see. So it's just getting them out and saying like, this is a special thing. This is not just a hike. This is not just you walking in your backyard. Like, this is a way of looking at nature and using your mind in a way that is going to benefit you, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is, or they wouldn't be prescribing it over in Japan, right? The doctors literally prescribe, and I've read there's national forests. It's a part of the national forest system. You take your hike in, and then they measure your vitals.
Yes, they do.
Japanese like to have everything very measured, and it's supported by their government, their doctors, everybody. It's just a part of life.
I have a big piece of anecdotal evidence that I'm really excited about, which is that I had.
Tell us?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I had an elderly couple come on one of my walks, and they were repeat attenders. So this was their second walk. And they told me that they had come back because the gentleman, I guess, regularly monitors his vitals, his blood pressure, and his heart rate. And after an hour and a half outside with me, everything was down to good levels for an entire week.
Oh, wow.
And that is not something they had with medication, with other treatments.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things where it was like, oh.
It really works.
It really works. And you guys have tested it, and you've come back, and you're excited about it. And I was just like, it just helps for me to reaffirm. Because it is a little woo-woo.
It is a little woo-woo.
And I'm a very logical person.
Okay.
And so I just want people to know that, like, I wouldn't be doing this, and I wouldn't be putting my energy into this if it wasn't something that I felt like really helped people.
Mm-hmm. You've seen it.
Yeah.
You've experienced it yourself, right?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it changed my whole life, basically.
Yeah, from being very logical to being like down there.
Yeah.
Right? Well, actually, you're just returning. Your own experiences are returning.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome. I think that happens to so many of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get like disconnected from the land.
Yeah.
And it's not the same as a hike because you're not. It's like, it feels like a hike, just like you just skim the surface of the land, and you may not even have, or like a walk with your friend and, Percy Warner or whatever.
Your intention on a hike, sometimes it's to have a conversation. Like, I love going on a walk with friends and just talking. If you're going on a hike, usually you've got a destination, you're going to a spot. Mm-hmm. When you're forest bathing, we might go a quarter of a mile. We might stay in the same spot and go out and then come back. Mm-hmm. So there isn't a length we need to go. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to get us anywhere. We're not rushing. I'm also kind of following the pace of the people I'm with. So if you guys are going slow, I'll go slow. If you're going fast, I'll probably try and get you to slow down a little, but I'll kind of go with whatever the group sees. And what is happening in the forest. Mm-hmm. So like, I come in with a plan, and then maybe I'll change it. Maybe it starts raining, and I'm like, ooh, let's do something with the rain. Maybe there are beautiful clouds, and we want to lay in the grass. Mm-hmm. So we're always the guides are always thinking, like, what is the best way that I can work with nature to create this experience for people?
It's part of your training, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned trauma-informed because I suspect some people may stop, finally, and come to a forest walk, and things might come up.
Yes.
Right? So can you talk about that experience and like how you would handle that, or?
Yeah, for sure.
You're trained to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a trauma-filled human, so I'm a trauma-informed human.
Okay.
Not like I've had a bad life, but I just, a lot of us have trauma, and so I know how I would want to be approached in that situation. And it's like, it's just, you do whatever you need. Mm-hmm. Let me know as much as I need to know that you're safe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that can be anything from like, do you need to go to the bathroom? Just let me know, and I'll like adjust the time so that you don't miss anything. Mm-hmm. Totally cool. Are you feeling emotional and need to leave? Is this not what you thought? Do you not like it? I won't take it personally. Just let me know.
Right.
If someone is crying, I'm not going to be like, oh, like, are you okay? Stop crying. Like it's fine if you're crying.
Part of the release, right?
Yeah. That's totally fine. We say when you share, like, you can share in any language, in any way. You could sing. I've seen some wonderful, just like body movements that people have done to show what they're feeling. I've had people who just lay down in the grass for the whole walk, and I'll check in with them and make sure they're not like wanting to come back to the group.
Right.
And that's fine. So really, like, nothing you do is wrong. Nothing you do is gonna make me upset, or I don't come in with expectations of like everyone's gonna finish this walk and have insightful.
Right.
Yeah.
It's gonna change their life.
Yeah.
They're all gonna become forest therapy.
Right. Yeah. Like it's you can come, you can sit through the first 5 minutes and say this is not what I want and leave, and maybe I'll be hurt a little bit because I'm a human, and but then I will be fine, because that's what I'm trained in is, it's not about me. Right. I'm just there to hold the space. I'm just a guide. It's about this person and their experience in nature. And maybe they're not ready for it, but I'll be here when you are ready.
Yeah. Or maybe that was like they got the first bit and it's a long journey, right? Yeah. And so the next time, whenever that might be, is the next part of like that reintegrating with nature. And
right.
I did want to ask a question about mobility.
Yes.
You and I are pretty, mobile, able to get around. So if somebody's listening and they want to come like to a walk, either one that we're going to host with you or an individual, like what do you talk, like kind of what's possible? Right. What if I was in a power wheelchair or
so I am
on a cane or whatever?
Unusually passionate about accessibility and adaptability for people. Like I think everybody should be able to do anything that they want. And I am open to tailoring the experience so that anybody can attend. Or going to people's, like, if you say you have agoraphobia, I'll come do a walk at your house. Like, we can do one in your room with a plant. Like, I will,
right here. Yeah.
I will meet you where you're at, because I think that's important. So if you're in a wheelchair, just let me know so that I can, or like
plan for it. Yeah.
Technically, there may not be certain places that you can go do walks, but I'm always down to find a place. And I
got the Memorial Garden.
Yeah.
It has a little trail.
Yeah. There are plenty of parks that have accessible areas. There's also the opportunity to not actually walk. So we could do a whole forest therapy experience where you're just seated in one place. So it really is whatever you need it
like
to
you
be.
Can't say like, oh well, I can't get around so easily. It's okay. Sarah can adjust.
Yeah.
Because
and I've had elderly people. I've had someone who is blind. I've had someone who is deaf. And all of that, the practice is already there to fit what people need. So there wasn't really much adjusting I need to do, because the whole idea of being a guide is looking at what you've got and saying, okay, how do I make this walk for these people? So you're crafting it in that moment and thinking like, I'm looking at this set of people, I'm trying to figure out, what accessibility issues or what are they capable of, and how can I make this easy for them? Because I don't want you to be thinking about like, can I get up this hill?
Right.
When you're trying to lose yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Now I know when we first met, we talked about age, so that might be an issue. Not our ages, but just like say I'm a stressed out mama and I want to come do a walk, but I got to have my 3-year-old with me. So what age really, or what would be the kind of cut off, and how you might suggest that? You don't do walks with children, right?
I have not yet.
Okay.
I would. My vision is kind of, we have 2 guides, and one guide kind of takes the adults out, lets them do their thing, and the other guide kind of watches the children, because children, they
naturally
do forest
wander.
bathing on their own. They're already doing the thing.
Right.
But maybe giving them some prompts and like having everybody come back together and share all together.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's important. Like obviously I will do forest bathing in any circumstance. If you need to bring your 3-year-old, we will make it work. But ideally, you would be able to not focus at all on childcare in that moment so that you can go fully experience nature.
Yeah.
I think if you've got a mature preteen person that can be on their own, you know, wandering about in nature in this controlled environment, totally cool.
Yeah.
It's all about like, can you trust this person to generally handle themselves in nature with this guide? If so, totally fine.
Yeah.
But again, I want to make it accessible.
Yeah. So it sounds like we might be looking for a second guide at some point.
Yeah.
Right. We'll have to keep that out there. Put that frequency beacon out there. There's somebody out there that's gonna become another guide at some point in time.
I know a few that are working on it.
Oh, cool.
So,
that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, any other things that you want to make sure you cover? Or I have some closing questions otherwise. Okay.
Let's hear 'em.
These are some questions we ask our guests. All right. So, do you have a quote or mantra by which you live?
I do.
Oh, will you tell us what it is?
I will tell you what it is. So I have not. I've had that. This has been my kind of life motto for about 10 years, and I've not been able to really distill it.
Okay.
So it is Tim Jule, which I'm not sure if you're familiar.
No.
So it is a story about the Bible from a fictional book.
Okay.
So John Steinbeck's East of Eden.
Okay.
There's this part in it towards the end, and you can just like look up Tim Jule, timshel.org.
Okay.
And it'll pull up just the excerpt from the book that has this whole thing. But basically, it's, and again, I feel bad explaining this because I'm in a church and I'm not well versed in the Bible.
That's all right.
It's a Bible thing. So basically, when God talks to Cain and says, you will, blank over sin. And in this book, they look at it and they're like, it says you will conquer over sin. And they're like, oh, that means that you're predestined to. Like, man will definitely conquer over sin. God has said that that's happening.
Okay.
And then they looked at another translation and it said, do thou conquer over sin. And it's like, like whatever. And then they finally distill it down to the original Hebrew word, which is timshul, which means thou mayest.
Oh, okay.
So it puts it back on man.
Okay.
And it says, God is saying to Cain, you may conquer over sin. But it's not on God, it's on you. And I kind of took that, and I was also reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning at the time. Oh,
yeah, wow. Woo,
yeah.
You're reading the classics.
Yeah. I was really trying to find, my spirituality, because I was raised Catholic. And it kind of let me down in a few ways.
The priests are all about forest bathing, aren't they?
And so I was just trying to figure things out, and those two concepts together of in any situation, including literally the most horrific situation, so that we know you still have a choice to control your outlook on the situation and how you behave. And in that way, I kind of was like, okay, I will always have this choice to have this outlook on life. And I got it tattooed on me.
I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, so this is it.
You've got a little tattoo going on here, and yes, I can see now that you turn your wrist.
Yeah.
It is Hebrew.
It is Hebrew.
I did have to learn Hebrew in my training. Yeah, cool.
So, yeah, it's just this idea that, I can't put blame on anybody else for anything because I am responsible for me. But that also opens things up that, I'm responsible for me. I can, and they say something in the book that that's man's ladder to the stars,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because it's we have the control. we have the control over ourselves.
Uh-huh.
We're responsible for ourselves, and that is freeing and also big and, just
Terrifying
remembering.
all at the same time.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's funny because after I got that tattoo, my friends held me to not being able to say that I couldn't do something for a whole year.
Oh.
So they were really like, you may.
Yeah.
And it frustrated me, but I was also like, you're holding me to this principle that I've
Yeah.
recently adopted.
Potential. The
Yeah.
Hebrew word.
Mm-hmm.
You may
Yeah.
conquer, right?
Yeah.
You may. Like
You
you may
may.
rise above this.
You may, but you may not, but that's on you.
Right.
You
Yeah.
can't blame that on God. You can't blame that on your family circumstances. You can't blame that on anybody else.
Yeah. Your
Um,
boss, whatever. Yeah.
right,
It's
yeah.
like, yeah. Yeah. It reminded me a little bit of water. I know that sounds really weird, but
yeah.
like water finds its way, right?
It does.
It just, even if it has to cut the path through the
Yeah.
rock, it will find its way.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I love that.
Mhm.
So, yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So, books or a resource or a teacher that you want to make sure our listeners know about. And it can be something on force therapy or something
Yeah.
that really is your favorite, that really kind of keeps you grounded, whichever.
For force therapy, there's a great book by Amos Clifford that kind of walks you through kind of a self-practice
Okay.
on forest bathing. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's probably
Amos
got
Clifford.
forest
Okay.
bathing.
It's probably got some green on the cover.
Yes. That book is really lovely. I'm also a big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh
Oh, cool.
and anything and everything that he has put together, because I feel like he really distills things down in a way that you're just like, oh, when I'm washing the dishes, I'm washing the dishes.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
mindfulness,
Yeah.
And so he was kind of my entry into this whole world and trying to be more mindful,
Uh-huh.
which
Present.
led me to force therapy, because it's hard to try and be mindful.
Mhm.
It's easier if you find ways that you can kind of like slip into it.
Yeah, ways that kind of fit you.
Exactly.
I think, I like to think we're moving out of, in this shift from modernity to post-modernity, we're moving out of like everybody's got to fit into the mold of how
Yeah.
you do, like everybody's got to fit into the mold of like how you connect with God or how you,
Yeah.
how your spirituality is, whatever. But now it's like, well, it's on you, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got to find the way that kind of works. And like we said earlier, there's so much accessibility, at least in an urban area. And it's growing because of, beautiful technology that, you can live somewhere far out. Like, it sounds like you grew up in a little bit of a rural area.
Suburbs.
Suburbs.
Yeah.
I grew up in a rural area,
Okay.
so there was ways that, a lot didn't kind of get to us, if you will.
Mhm.
But now it does, because
Right.
you can find it on the
Yeah.
internet. So I was able to be in Wisconsin and look for a forest therapy person. Unfortunately, the closest was not until Minnesota. That
Oh,
I could
really?
find.
That's
And there's probably
surprising.
somebody in Wisconsin, I
Mhm.
just didn't find it.
Yeah.
But cool. So anything by Thich Nhat Hanh, of course. Yeah, very
Big fan.
much. My dentist is a big fan, so every time I go to the dentist, I get another book.
That's very
him.
cool. Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about as you were kind of talking about your mantra even is, I know this is a little bit outside of the realm of like Orthodox kind of
Yeah.
Christianity, but I've read that, when the first like cathedrals and whatever were being built, it usually was like go into a site where, in the forest, where there had been like gorgeous columns of trees and like raise them, like cut them down.
Oh, wow.
And like build, and it was a way that like, it was a way the conquerors, if you will,
Yeah.
would kind of get rid of whatever indigenous religion was there at
Oh,
the
wow.
time. So especially if there was any sense of like worshiping out in the forest, especially in the clash with the Roman and Celtic kind of world coming together.
I bet. Yeah.
Just like, so it's interesting. There's some books I've read that kind of look at the like the layout of cathedrals and the layout of like a forest, if you will. And I've
Wow.
had a chance to be in some cathedrals and basilicas in
Yeah.
southern France. And I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, you even see like the tall columns
Yeah.
often.
Now that I'm thinking
And like
about
it's almost like they're trying to recreate the canopy with these
Mhm.
very high,
Yeah.
cathedrals way up there, and that sense of light is always really
Right.
important if you think about like how the
Yeah.
light comes into a forest amid the trees. So
It makes sense. I
it's
bet they
very
were.
suspicious.
I bet they were inspired. You know, like when you walk
Yeah.
into a certain grove of trees and the light's hitting just right, and you're like, you feel like you hear angels singing. You're just
Yeah.
like, wow, this is like a moment where nature is really shining.
Right, right. And it's kind of a little bit interesting to think there's a shift happening, I think, in Christianity where there are a lot of people kind of leaving institutions and leaving buildings, if you will, and kind of going to do things like forest therapy or
Yeah.
just being out in nature. And so it's kind of interesting to think
Yeah.
about, like, well, I think you said earlier on, like, we evolved in the forest, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we started.
Right. And one thing I really like about forest therapy, and this is something somebody else said, not something I said, but that it's very spiritually neutral.
Uh-huh.
So you come into it with whatever spiritual or religious beliefs you have, and this is probably not going to clash with that.
Right.
And it's not
Right.
going to tell you that you're wrong or you're right. It's just another piece of living.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like that it's spiritually neutral because it puts us all on the same plane.
Yeah, you can be whoever and
Yeah.
just come together. That's, I think, one of the ways that, like, taking to the forest, taking it outside from COVID, it's one of the ways almost it's like trying to evolve us as a people.
Yeah.
Because we can all unite outside and we can
Exactly.
see how all things are interconnected
Yeah.
outside, right? So, yeah, cool. Okay. One other thing I was going to say about that is just as you think about the metaphors that are in so many religions, it's like in Christianity, for instance, we talk about like Jesus is the light of the world, right? And we have all of these metaphors from nature and all of the words and images from light and, trees and like there's psalms that talk about God being the rock and being the solid foundation and all that. It's all coming from nature. And I'm a big lover of John Philip Newell, who I've had a pilgrimage with him on Iona, which was awesome, but reminds us, like, when we read the Gospels, like, Jesus is using outdoor things, if you will, because they lived outside.
Right. He's
Right?
looking at, he's like, oh, there's a rock over there. There's a bush here. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like all of the metaphors are just coming from the land.
And it's
so,
timeless. Like,
Yes.
there was a rock
Yeah.
then, there's still a rock.
There's still
So
rocks.
we still know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. So there's a ways in each of our own like spiritual or religious traditions, we can look and see how is nature a part of it. And
Yeah.
I would be suspect, honestly, of religious expressions that are not trying to reunite us with nature.
For
Personally, I would be suspect.
Yeah.
Just because it's just alienating, as you've sort of shared today in like your own body. You've experienced anxiety in your own body that is able to be calmed when you're back in nature, right? And so
sure.
anyway, it's my little sermonette right there during your time. Sorry.
No,
But
it's great.
okay, so what any other resources or anything you want to share? That's pretty much
I think that's it. I've got, if you go to my website, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, I link to some stuff. There's some more like scientific articles and further reading. I have a little blog where I write some stuff.
Oh, cool.
So-
Well, maybe we should just skip right to that. We'll get
Okay.
back. We'll get back to the other question in just a minute. But
Yeah.
tell listeners where we can find you.
Yeah.
And
So my
you're a blogger
website.
too. That's awesome.
All
All right, everybody, take a note. Her website is.
It's Forest Walk With Me, but it's forestwalkwith.me.
Okay.
And on Instagram, I'm at Sarah R. Champion.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
yeah. And those are my
And-
two main.
And when you go to the website, you can find ways to, like, it sounds like you have resources there, but also
Yeah. So I
you
list
can, like,
my walks
Okay.
that are upcoming because I've got public walks whenever land tenders or landowners like you guys have interest and want to host something. I also offer private walks, couples walks, group walks. That's kind of open to, you can say you want me to pick a spot, you could pick a spot.
okay, cool.
Pretty open. I've got resources. I link to the like forest therapy guide finder. So if you're in another area,
Like Wisconsin.
yeah, there are a lot of guides. So you should be able to find one or two in your most major cities.
Okay.
And that'll help find that. There's the articles. I've done a little blogging just about things. I've got
That sounds
a
awesome.
playlist up there. So
Ooh, a playlist, like from nature sounds or just your favorite?
no, it's just like it's just my forest walk with me playlist. So it's like
Okay.
what I listen to when I'm going to do a forest therapy walk.
Okay.
I mean, it's just like indie, jazz, R&B,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
a blend.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome. So you can still walk with music in your ears, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
cool. All right. Okay, so I think then we want to come back to, we do want to make sure we share about spring equinox.
Yes.
Want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so on March 19th at 6:45, we're doing a walk here
Yeah.
on the property, the 9 acres. We're going to do a spring equinox walk and bonfire. And so we're going to do, the forest therapy walk, pretty traditional. And then finish off with some snacks and maybe some s'mores.
Yeah, definitely some s'mores. We got
Yeah.
a fire tender here, so
Mhm.
we're all set. We have a fire pit, we're all
Yeah,
set.
so even if it's cold, we'll just bundle up around the fire, go out, do our forest therapy, come back, talk about it. It'll be really lovely.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can't wait.
Mhm.
We've talked about, and our leadership is excited about the change of the seasons, having
Oh,
a
yeah.
walk at each time, so we're
Yeah,
excited
It's a
about that.
good way to mark and honor things.
Yeah, and we'll figure something out for Earth Day.
Yes.
We haven't quite been there yet,
Yeah.
but we'll get there. So what parting words of encouragement might you have for our listeners?
I would encourage everybody to go outside today,
Okay.
and that's kind of it. So just like go outside, 5 to 10 minutes, and like try to not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if it feels good to you, maybe you do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Miss tomorrow, maybe you do it the next day.
Cool.
Or if you're stressing out, go outside.
See what happens,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
see the shift. Yeah. That would be awesome. And they could leave comments for us and tell us.
Yeah, tell us
what happened.
Tell us what you noticed. That's always my favorite.
Yes. what
Because
do you notice?
people bring things I've just I'm trying to think of a good example, but people bring things I've never thought about before.
I found bones, honestly.
Yeah.
I was so surprised. And I was so, on the walk I did over at Shelby Bottoms, was like, I just kept coming across all these bones. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah,
What's
sometimes
going
your
on
eyes
here?
open up to something and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, this thing is everywhere.
Yes, it really
Yeah.
was. So that was sort of shocking. Don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I don't think we found any human bones.
Oh yeah, hopefully not.
no. But we did find a human body at one point in time in the lake in
Oh,
Wisconsin.
I would love to hear that
So
story
anyway,
sometime.
it's a different. Sorry, that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I noticed the bones and then like kind of brought them back. With that walk, there was a little like kind of coming back at the end, a little ceremony that led into the tea ceremony.
Yes.
And I somehow or another, she encouraged us to do something. A friend and I were together, and we both found some bones, and
Yeah.
we went and like buried the bones, like kind of
Oh,
returned them to the
interesting.
earth.
Yeah. Something
So
that I find a lot of people enjoy is when we tell people to bring something back.
yes.
So we'll say
yes.
like go explore this or this, and maybe you find something you want to bring back. And people really love the show and tell.
Oh yeah, that was super fun in the circle.
mhm.
I did enjoy that.
Yeah, so I like to incorporate that one, and then we kind of use that to create like,
like
know,
a
like a
little
little-
altar.
Yeah.
Is what we kind of did.
Yeah,
The
we-
centerpiece.
yeah, it's hard to find the words that are like neutral enough, but it does end up being kind of like a little nature altar,
Yeah.
like a representation of everything you've found that day. And I guess one of the ways that I add my own twist to it is that I'm a little gatherer. So as we're walking, I'm picking up things. And I
Yeah.
create this like very cool setup at the end with all these things that I've found on the walk
Yeah.
to kind of
That's
represent
awesome.
where we are in that moment.
Yeah.
And then I take a
Yeah.
photo, so those are on my Instagram. You can see all my teas.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, it's like a little
Oh,
art.
we can't wait to have
art thing.
tea.
Mhm.
Tea from our actual land. Like,
Yeah.
that is amazing. We don't have to just buy it
Right.
from a tea shop or
Yeah.
on Amazon, however we get our tea.
Mhm.
Right. So that's cool. Okay, well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
I mean, Sarah and I could probably talk on for another couple hours.
Yeah, I
like
have no
we did
idea
the
how long
first
it's
time. We don't know how long this podcast is. We hope you've enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
It's been wonderful chatting with you today. I look forward to all that unfolds in our time together,
You
and
as
so
well.
in these months ahead. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll even get to have you back at some point in
Yeah,
time.
anytime.
Podcasting. And thank you all so much for listening today to Conversations for Peace. And you can catch us next month. We will have episode 3, and you'll see who's coming. We have a couple lined up already in the months ahead. So thanks so much. Have a blessed day.